Hello and welcome to polyplane.com. Today we're going to be talking about the big daddy of all of the surfacing tools, and that's network surface. But before we do, I kind of want to just go over some of the things that we've talked about over the last few weeks and kind of put it all together so that you kind of understand where I'm going. So with any surface generation tool that I've talked about so far, it pretty much follows a couple of rules. One, there are a set of control curves, and then two, there's a general direction to how those curves are flowing. With either one, if it's, say it's lofting, you're going to take two cross-section curves. In this case, we're just using straight lines to keep it simple. And you're telling those two curves to translate in a particular direction. Or if it's, say, sweep one, you have your two curves and you have one rail, and you're telling those two curves to follow that rail. Or if it's two curves, you have two rails, and those two cross sections follow both of those rails, and you generate the surface. So with patch, it's a little bit different. You're defining a boundary line, and then you create your cross sections within that, and then you generate your surface. Now, with the network surface tool, it's a little bit different. There's a few new benefits that come with the network surface tool that you wouldn't really find with, say, the sweep 2, where you can really define all four sides of your surface all at once. So let's switch over to Rhino here and see what I mean. So what I've got here are four surfaces. They were all generated using different techniques. The first one, I just used the generate surface tool, which, if you didn't know, that's found over here under surface, and then this tool right here, and you can just click and drag that out and make your surface. The next one was I used a two rail sweep, and I swept these two cross section curves along these two rails, this one and this one. And then the next one I did, and we're going to come back to this in a second, this was a sweep 1 where these two curves acted as one rail, and then these were my cross sections. And before I forget, this angular sort of surface generation is, I'm going to be referring to this as torpedoing, because I don't actually know if it has a specific name, but that's what I've always referred to it in my head, so that's what we're going to go with. And then over here is network surface, and I'm going to show you this today, but I want you to realize something here. I was able to create four surfaces. Actually, technically, this one is a poly surface. It's composed of two surfaces, using a variety of tools to yield pretty much the same result. If you look at them on in render preview, I mean, they don't look that much different, but they have a few different qualities that I want to go over. So let me explode this poly surface, the one that has the torpedoing, and I'm going to turn on the control points for all of these surfaces. So immediately you should start to see a little bit of what makes these all so different. With this one, the just general create surface, I was able to create a surface, but it has a limited amount of control points here. The next one, the two rail sweep, this one has control points, but they're based upon how many control points initially put into the input command of doing the sweep 2. The sweep 1, where I've got this one single rail and these two side curves that are kind of riding along that rail, have created this diagonal array of control points. And if this is what you're looking for, it's great. But if you're not, and you want a normal surface like the one directly right of it, it's going to yield some pretty nasty results that we're trying to avoid. And finally is the networked surface generation, which gives me a predictable set of control points along the surface. And I can do this with any of these, but I can do this with this one quickest, is to rebuild the surface, and add in some additional control points here. So we're going to crank up the control points to 10, click OK, and now you can see that that surface has now added a bunch more control points, which allows us even more control over that surface. Now that we've covered that, we can talk about the curves that actually create the network surface. Let's take a look at that. We have these these three groups of three curves. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to show you something interesting based upon what I've kind of topically covered just a minute ago. And that is that when you're generating a surface, it's best to avoid torpedoing. This is most easily accomplished by taking one of your curves and splitting it into two. Now, where that split happens is actually pretty critical. So there's this curve here, and it comes down and starts to straighten out. Wherever your curve straightens out, that's where I recommend doing your split. And you can do a split by just, drawing a curve out from that one point, selecting your curve, hitting split, and then you'll have your two pieces. So the reason this is important is when a surface is generated, it likes to have four boundary lines. So when you're generating a surface, the output result is really dependent on you finding 4 edges versus 3. If I were to do a sweep 1 command on this line set over here on the left, you're going to immediately get torpedoing because these two rails share a common point at the very tip, and they're riding along this as the bottom rail. Now it's true, I could do the sweep 1 command again on this rail, but then these two cross-section curves share this point down here, so your torpedoing is going to happen down there. Now if I were to split the curve into 4, well, you could say, well, you could just simply do a sweep 2 and that would clean up your surface, and you'd be right. But the network surface command, if I select my four curves again, is going to yield an even cleaner result. The ISO curves that are following on the surface are much more predictable. So let's see this in a little bit more of a dynamic example. Okay, so what I've got here are 4 sets of curves, and I haven't done any trickery. There's not any additional splits in here or anything. And what we're going to do is I'm going to sweep 2, this first one on the left. I'm going to make these my rails and these my cross sections. I'm going to hit enter. And the prompt that comes up, rebuild, we're not even going to simplify it. And give it an OK. And you can see where your ISO curves are now. Now, if I were to take the same set of curves again and network them, this command is network srf, you get this prompt that comes up, and it's asking you for the tolerance. So the surface that it's fitting through, you want that surface to hit those curves as close as possible. My interior curves and my edge curves, that's 1/1000th of an inch in tolerance. That's pretty good for what we're doing. And you don't really even need to worry about the edge matching. So you can click preview, and you can see your ISO curves are really uniformly distributed along the grid, and everything's super awesome. Now the other cool thing, besides being a more uniform surface, is you can actually add in more cross sections. So unlike the sweep 2, where you're kind of limited by, you've got 2 rails and then as many cross sections as we want, here you can have as many curves going in the U direction and as many going in the V direction as you want. So if I network this, it's now going to use those interior curves to kind of influence how the surface is generated. And initially they kind of look the same, but if you look, there's a bigger difference going on in how this surface was generated versus this one. And that's because of these interior curves that I used to define how that surface would flow at that point. So you can get really, really complex surfaces just by using this additional tool. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, then why wouldn't I just use network surface all the time? And that's a great question. The answer is time. It takes a lot more time to generate all of these curves here than it does to just generate the 4 outside curves. And when you get into more and more complex surfaces, that's more curves that you have to draw. So if you can say the same thing with 4 curves that you can say with 6, depending on what you're doing, it might just be easier just to use the 4. So in this case, if I didn't have to do too much additional work, like any sort of surface trims on the surface after this thing was generated, I might just go with the 2-rail sweep here. But if I have additional information that needs to go across the surface, like these cross sections here, it might make more sense to go with the network surface command and give myself a little bit more control over the surface. And with all of these, I can rebuild them after they're generated and give myself pretty much an identical surface, especially with these two on the left. This one's going to be a little bit different, obviously, because it has those control curves. Now that you kind of understand how surfaces are generated and how, more importantly, to generate good surfaces versus surfaces that have torpedoing, you can go forth and make some crazy cool surfaces using random curves. Play around with it. Come up with some cool shapes and don't be afraid to experiment. The one thing that I would say when you're first starting with this tool is to build all of your curves nice and simple. Don't go too complex or bending them around in crazy ways. Like, all of these curves are still on one plane. They're flat. They're not bent or anything. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing when you're first learning how to use this tool. And then as soon as you're feeling comfortable with it, start bending the curves around. So if I were to take this and bend it so that the curves are starting to live on more than one plane, you can start to get even more dynamic with them. But keep it simple at first so you don't get too frustrated, and hit me up with any questions, and leave some comments below. And pretty soon here in the store, the next video is going to be coming up, and that's going to be a surfacing video. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the tools that we've been going over in the last few weeks, like the sweep tool, the loft tool, the patch, and this network surface tool, and we're going to take those and employ them to build a model. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be updating the site when that comes out. But play around, maybe start a Flickr set at flickr.com and post some of your images. You can screen cap to file is a cool little command here in Rhino, and you can actually save out your images and see how everybody's coming along with their learning. So all right, thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.